Welcome to another episode of the Leading Communities podcast, a platform where we help develop discussions on topics vital to local communities and offer insights from both leadership perspectives and community viewpoints. Join us as we explore the issues, stories and experiences that shape our communities and inspire change. My name is Hugh and I'm your host for today's podcast. And I'd like to introduce you to our two guests today. We've got Piotr. How you doing, Piotr?
I'm not bad.
Excellent. And Qasim.
Yes, I'm well, thank you.
So I've obviously got an introduction here about the work that the two of you do, but I think it's always nicer if we hear from you about you. So tell us about yourself. So I'll start with you, if that's right, Piotr.
I'm here in my kind of both professional and personal capacity. So
Okay.
I guess I can bring the two together of the work that Qasim and I do together through Europeans Welfare Association, which I work for. Qasim joined us just before the summer in the spring as part of the University of Birmingham internship scheme.
Because you yourself, you're a historian, aren't you?
I'm, by academic background. I recently finished my master's in history.
What was the topic or the focus?
The topic. So my focus throughout the 2 years was I'm really interested in nationalism,
Right.
as an ideology, but also in terms of what we call in the kind of discipline, the history of emotions, of like how people react and feel in relation to national affiliation and the kind of constellation of sentiments that brings about. So I was interested in kind of interrogating that, and especially from the perspective of Polish nationalism.
Which is your heritage.
Which is my heritage, which is my background. And this kind of folds back into the work that Qasim and I do together. And we've had a lot of conversations backwards and forwards when we've spoken about our work, about topics of national identity and nationalism and the role of the state in society, stuff like this. So yeah, that's kind of, I guess, the academic background, and in terms of personally, Polish.
And the projects that you've worked on, some of them relate to crime, social justice, and cultural outreach, and you talked about the European Welfare Association. So tell us about that.
So we are a charity based in the Black Country in Sandwell. We were formed out of a Polish supplementary school, which was formed in Warsaw. So I guess our reach and our community spans predominantly the Black Country, but also further afield, Birmingham as well. We have a lot of families that attend the school from Birmingham, Coventry, just the general Midlands area, actually. And out of this kind of community of the Polish supplementary school, because year on year, more and more people would join, we realized, people would share their stories, their experiences, need legal aid, need help with translation, advice, counselling. So we formed a charity based off those needs. So it was very grassroots.
So what influenced you when you were younger to kind of move into this kind of world of work? Because your mom is the person that, did she set the charity up? Is that right?
Yeah. Well, so she actually set it up along with our other director for their children, so that they could keep up Polish as first generation migrants. So there was a group of parents that got together and basically were like, we've got young children here in the UK. How do we make sure that they keep that Polish language alive? How do they have a relationship with the culture, the history? But they're able to go back, to Poland for holidays and speak with their grandparents.
That's fantastic. So you're currently working on community engagement initiatives to combat violence and discrimination. Is that right?
Yeah.
Brilliant. And Qasim,
Yes.
tell us about you.
Yes, my name is Qasim. I'm a law graduate from the University of Birmingham, currently pursuing a master's in law and social justice, and also a very honored and proud representative of the venerable and illustrious organization, the European Welfare Association. And yes, and that's what I've been, what I am and what I've been doing so far. I've always been, Hugh, very deeply and passionately concerned with issues of social injustices.
Why is that?
It deeply troubles me to know that individuals could be denied opportunities based on their race, gender, class, or other socio-economic factors. And if I may just take a moment to speak about the importance of my religion in being a primary source of motivation. As a Muslim, one of the greatest examples that we have as Muslims is the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, who served as a savior for the Arab people. Now, if he is our greatest example, we must also be saviors in our capacity and in our regard. So I cannot drive by, pass by, and walk by and see members of the human family afflicted and suffering, despised and rejected, and not do anything about it. So I've been fortunate that in my capacity that God has allowed me the opportunity to lift individuals out of that position and for them to live prosperous and meaningful lives.
There aren't many people that have that kind of level of social commitment that you have.
Yes.
So why do you think, because we all have to believe and have faith in humanity fundamentally, don't we, to carry on, day in, day out. Why do you think people don't help in the way that maybe they should do?
I think the answer to that is very complex, and indeed the answer to that is the answer is the answer is a lot more
15.
complex than the questioning implies. But I would like to think that people become so immersed in their own lives and as they progress in their careers, they become disassociated and disattached with their roots and with their communities and society. And so I believe that bridge begins to develop between, that gap begins to develop between them and their communities. But for those individuals like me who see religion as the greatest source of inspiration and motivation for me, one of the sayings of our Prophet is, "The greatest of among you is those that are beneficial to others." Similarly, in the biblical scriptures, it is said, I believe, I can't remember the exact reference, but the quote is, "Faith without works is dead." So until and unless we translate our faith into the everyday practices of our lives and make our faith living, we will always have a stagnant faith.
And I suppose there's the argument that most faiths preach that, don't they?
Yeah.
They say about by helping other people, the joys become tenfold on you.
Absolutely, yes.
So selfishly be selfless.
Yes, yes.
Or be selfless selfishly,
Be selfless,
because
yes.
it comes, the riches of that.
Yes, absolutely. And I think one of the greatest travesties we have in our world, in our society, is individuals not practicing what they profess or preach. And we need to start practicing what we preach. And again, there's so many religious quotations that support this statement. Jesus says, "Be ye doers of the word and not just hearers of the word." And Prophet Muhammad teaches us that mere belief counts for nothing except that belief is carried into practice. So I want to, and I hope God allows me the opportunity to use my knowledge and my ability to uplift those around me.
So you're both from different cultural backgrounds, arguably,
Yes.
So how have your personal experiences shaped what multiculturalism means to you?
Well, so this was kind of the bedrock of the work that we started doing together.
Yes.
I think just as a...
Because how did you meet?
So through Qasim applying to work at EWA through the University of Birmingham.
I was fortunate that Elizabeth was impressed by my interview. And,
Elizabeth being
the director, one of the directors.
Who's your mom?
Yes.
Yes. And I've had the wonderful opportunity of working with Elizabeth and colleagues and Piotr since.
Brilliant.
And so just going, I think one addition I want to make to Qasim's comment before I answer that question is a very important aspect of civil society organizations is formed out of the bedrock of faith groups.
Yes.
And I see this kind of manifested at every event that I go to that's put on by various organizations where you've got the whole constellation of faith, like you said, the mosques, the synagogues, the gurdwaras, the various denominations of Christian churches. There's they're a fabulous example of multiculturalism in British society when they come together for civil society causes. And it's really encouraging to see. In terms of mine and Qasim's backgrounds, I think the reason why we started working was when he started the internship, I had a conversation with him and I said, what are you interested in working on within the kind of scope and remit of the work that we do, which is quite broad in the sense of I work on a project which focuses on looking at our, we're a third-party reporting center, which basically means we help people from our community, which is prevalently Central Eastern European communities, a lot of Poles especially, but also Romanians, Ukrainians, to reach out to these communities to help report stuff like hate crime, labor exploitation is a really prevalent issue, violence against women. These are kind of like the big three that we're looking to focus on within our capacity as a third-party reporting center. But at the same time, I've also worked on cultural projects that we've done. So it's a very kind of wide field. And Qasim said that he was interested both, and I think you can answer this yourself. Actually,
it was various issues, and I'll answer that question also in this response. It was me and Piotr had a very lengthy and in-depth discussion, and one of the topics, one of the issues at the time that was particularly pertinent was the issue of polarization.
Social polarization.
Yes, and this was being perpetuated and intensified.
So can you describe what you mean by social polarization?
Yes, where individuals and communities, religious groups, cultural groups were becoming quite dissatisfied with the current socio-political and economic state of the country.
And growing further apart.
And that links with your MA as well, doesn't it, about the whole thing of nationalism?
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
And so we thought that, and at that time, we had listened to remarks from politicians who lambasted multiculturalism. And we thought that this was absolutely unfair. For example, the then former Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, condemned multiculturalism to be a failure. And we took umbrage to such remarks, and we thought it's important for us to convene a conference on multiculturalism and to begin a dialogue and to explore the reality of multiculturalism, which is that multiculturalism, it does have a few challenges, but overall has been a huge success in our country. And the three of us sitting on this table is a testament to that success.
Well, that's why
you kind of go,
it's almost laughable, and I don't mean to be facetious in this, that the very person making those remarks was a shining example of its success. I mean, she...
and I don't think that's gone unnoticed.
It hasn't. And I'm sure she did probably regret those comments.
And that's the personal spark in it, where if you're seeing stuff in the media saying that basically your background and your life and your existence in British society is deemed to be a failure, then what else can you do other than get together and actually speak about it and try and galvanize some action?
And for us, me and Piotr, we saw multiculturalism as a ubiquitous concept and engulfing in a very paradoxical space in discourse. It was lauded as emblematic of progressive inclusivity, but then criticized for bringing fragmentation. And so this very paradoxical insight almost forced us and compelled us to not to acquiesce to the narratives of division, but to elucidate the value of multiculturalism. And I believe that we were successful in doing so. And I'm sure in this podcast today, we'll have an opportunity to discuss more about that conference that we held.
So given your work with diverse communities, what shared values and goals have you personally found to be effective in unifying people across cultural differences? So you talk about all these different faiths. What is it that you do to kind of bring them together?
Yes. All people fundamentally crave a sense of belonging, which is rooted in also very simple things: security.
Yes.
That security of circumstance, and this is one of the reasons why we are growing further apart socially, is economic inequality as a rising issue in this country. And then it's easy to sow those seeds of misunderstanding and mistrust between communities when you address the issue of society based on othering people and marginalizing groups and saying, it's us versus them. So I think one way of looking at this kind of us versus them narrative is see what do we all crave? And I think fundamentally it's to have that sense of belonging within local society.
Yes.
And something interesting that we've been looking at within our research, so Qasim mentioned the conference, we've also been conducting interviews. We did
Yeah.
some surveys. We're looking to organise a listening campaign in the Black Country in the new year. But in the surveys,
So when you say like a listening campaign, so how would that operate?
So basically going out to different groups. So for example, we've spoken to people at the police, we've spoken to people at Gurdwaras, spoken to people that are working in local council of saying, look, we want to go out there. You've got access to public spaces where you can get people together. We want to organise listening sessions where we kind of have some clear, simple questions, and everybody in the room is encouraged to speak for a few minutes about how they feel and what their experiences are related to these questions.
And just before I come back to that question, I also want to just follow on upon what Piotr was saying. We had determined that in the West Midlands there was a lack of voice given to those individuals that come from marginalised communities, particularly in relation to issues like migration and immigration. And we felt that these individuals were not feeling heard and were not being visible. And so we are determined, with the support of other organisations and other religious groups, that it's imperative that we conduct listening campaigns, because we need to know the lived reality. And so when we hopefully do this, we will know what the frustrations are, what the current perils of going through a system of migration is. And so when we present our findings to our elected representatives, we can say that this is the concerns and these are the issues and these are the frustrations that your constituents are presenting with, and you have a duty to act upon this.
So once you find those commonalities, you draw upon those, and that's the opening, isn't it? That kind of feeds the energy to kind of put it out there a bit more.
We hope to draw findings from the West Midlands, including Walsall, Sandwell, Coventry, and even Wolverhampton. So we want to bring all these narratives together to create one unified voice.
You talked about the conference, didn't you? Do you want to talk about that?
Absolutely. We had come to an acute realization that as a result of the riots, we saw divisions deepening, communities fracturing.
Do you mean the recent ones that happened?
Yes.
I think just to go back though for a second, because coincidentally the riots actually happened
later.
Once we were already planning these events.
Yes.
So you could you could see already starting.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not claiming we had a crystal ball and we were looking into the future or anything. It was
the main inspiration, as I spoke about, was analysing the language that was being used by politicians, and undeniably, the language of hate has saturated our politics in recent years and created the fertile ground for the violence and the scale of violence in which we saw with the rioting. But Piotr, do you want to speak?
Well, that gave us, the topic of the riots is an interesting one, because Qasim and I, so what the context that we've given you, started working on this in the spring. And we were, basically covering this terrain quite deeply, doing a lot of research, reaching out to people in the local area who work at the council, work at the police, a member of Citizens UK who's doing great work as well, trying to kind of bring, all the disparate voices of the civil society, of local authorities together. And we're speaking about all these themes, and then the riots happened.
Yes.
And it kind of, I think it gave us an extra impetus, that extra fire in our belly of, this is exactly the problem that we're trying to address.
And it came at a very timely manner, coincidentally.
Yeah, and we could have a whole podcast episode just on that context. So I don't want to go into it too much, but we were trying to come at it from this angle of also, because the us versus them narrative can also slide into solely saying that the perpetrators are the problem, and you've got these bad eggs, and we sweep away the problem, but we don't look actually at the root causes.
And that was the fascinating thing on social media, wasn't it? That there were lots of posts about the behaviours of people, and everybody, people laughing at the behaviours, but it's a smoke screen.
Exactly.
It's a real smoke screen,
exactly.
and it's about, like you said, why is this happening?
Exactly.
Why is this happening? And that's where the work has to come in, and that's the work that you're both doing, and the organisation you work for doing. For those who might not know what civic spaces are,
if I may, I wanted to, because you spoke about the values question, and I want to just really just say one thing, And I believe it's so important, and I want to take the time to voice this message, and that's the value of solidarity.
Yeah, 100%.
I think once we saw the eruptions of the riots, and of course, undeniably, these were attacks on the principles of religious, racial, and ethnic tolerance.
Also British values, in a sense.
Yes, and we saw attacks on... Yes.
But we love to talk about British values being being tolerant, speaking about things in the public forum without it devolving into violence.
And to be honest, Hugh, we saw attacks on religious centres, we saw attacks on immigration, housing, asylum seekers.
Which is still ongoing.
Which is still ongoing. And then we saw how communities came together in solidarity from different racial and religious sectors, and how they formed a united front. And I think that's very important. And historically, I remember during the Cold War, during the height of the Berlin Wall, John Fitzgerald Kennedy stood in Berlin and said these words,
Ich bin ein Berliner.
Ich bin ein Berliner.
Yeah.
And he identified with the suffering of the wall that separated East Berlin and West Berlin. And he was lauded for making such comments. And so to take that as an example, it's so imperative that when we see one community and one section of a community suffering, that we all rally around them and we show that united communal force.
And
it's funny, isn't it? Because you often think, that something has to have happened to you for you to be kind.
Yes. Yeah.
And for you to be generous and engaged with something. And actually what we need to shift to is that it doesn't need to have happened to you.
I like that point, because I think
be kind.
Yeah.
Just be generous.
Yeah.
And those adages about it costs nothing. It truly doesn't cost in terms of economic, value. It doesn't cost anything to do it. Find the capacity and work on the capacity to be kind.
I really like that point, Hugh, because as Piotr was saying, we saw the us and them narrative, the I and them narrative. But we need to start speaking in terms of we,
the collective,
in terms of us.
And people always say things as well, don't they? Say we're all in the same boat. And I remember somebody saying to me, "Well, we're not all in the same boat. We're possibly in the same storm, but we're in different boats." Which talks about that whole thing about the equity and the equality of it.
And some of them are sinking, and only a few will get to port.
Civic spaces, then, for me. Can you explain and provide some examples of civic spaces, and what are your thoughts on investing in local civic spaces, and what can people do to rejuvenate them?
Okay, so it's funny because I've just come from an event in Warsaw where we were speaking about this, specifically focusing on youth spaces. So one pillar of kind of civic space for the youth are something, and also Qasim did work with this prior to joining us at EWA, our youth clubs, youth centres. And we were speaking about the peril that youth are in now with the closure over the last decade plus of youth centres, of having this space where people can come together, in this sense, kids, teenagers, come together, interact without having to have a structured activity. Because nowadays there's a big emphasis within kind of community organisations on having to provide a structured activity that will be delivered and can be measured, etc. A civic space is a forum where people can meet for the sake of meeting, for the sake of speaking. And, we speak about kind of mental health crisis amongst the youth, with social polarization, youth being radicalized, whether it's moving to the far right, you've got the issue of, for example, Tate and misogyny, etc. It's because we've prevented spaces for kids actually to get together, to socialize.
Just to socialize.
In a public space. And that's what civic spaces at their center are, like youth centers, libraries, community centers. You could even make the case that, for example, school, the council is a civic, that's the civic institution. But in terms of the spaces, like I said, libraries, clubs, centers where people do sports.
Absolutely. And when we talk about civic pride, we're not just talking about one's physical presence in an area, we're talking about the emotional and psychological attachment to that area.
Yeah, of course.
And when we speak, and Piotr raised a very salient point, he gave an example of a library. A library isn't just a place of learning. A library is a space of discovery, and more importantly, a space for community.
So a different kind of learning.
Yes, and unfortunately, these spaces are diminishing, and it's of huge significance and importance that we reinvest in these spaces.
So how can the people watching this today, what advice would you give to them if they wanted to either create their own such group or organisation to kind of, to sit with you, or how could they come on board the journey that you're trying to?
I think you saying different kind of learning hits the nail on the head, because a big topic in terms of multiculturalism, the different kind of learning is learning about each other through conversation, and that's what needs to be developed more. And we as an organisation are very passionate about that in terms of EWA, about having that conversation and bringing that conversation forward. So any kind of organisation that's looking to become, what we call CIC, which is registered as a charity, you've got we use the term charities, also NGO, non-government organisation, what we call generally the third sector. It's about bringing together local organisations is a very important thing when we're talking about topics like multiculturalism, because it's about having that wealth and diversity of voices where we do that different kind of learning.
So what would you say to somebody watching right now to get involved? What they need to do?
If I may just come in quickly, I think, from my own personal experiences, being a chairman of a local youth club in the past, there's a very strategic point that needs to be shared here. When you notice, and in my experience, the reason we initiated the youth club was because we had seen a drastic increase in the youth engaging in antisocial behaviour, gun crime, gang crime, knife crime, and other related crimes. And so we felt that it was up to us to go and create a space where we can engage the youth in positive recreational and sporting activities.
Right.
But the way we were able to do that was linking three main groups: local authorities, charities, and faith centres.
Yeah.
And we were able to create that almost strand of understanding and collaboration and cooperation, and that led to the success of our youth club.
It kind of goes back to that thing of find the commonality.
Yeah.
Yes.
And sorry.
No, not at all. No, please.
Just to add to that, I think Qasim gave the backdrop of how this comes together in terms of the institutions. But to answer your question in terms of if someone would be interested to join as an individual, I think it's locating what composes you in terms of your identity, your background, like what is your entry point that you're passionate about of engaging in the public sphere.
So if it's sport or is it art?
Is it through sport? Is it through, are you a creative, artistically? Is it your faith? Is it a particular cause within society that you're passionate about? Whatever composes that category of you and your passions, finding existing work done in the local area, joining through there, and then, like Qasim said, whether that's from the background of faith group, a cultural group, migrant charity like ourselves, I think that's how you initially get involved. Yes. And then it's finding your space within that. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. We've talked prior to actually being filmed today about being inspired by people, and the both of you have the privilege of that familial heritage. So your mom was very, very important to you because she actually runs the organisation that you work for. And you were talking about your parents, your mum and dad. So tell us about how they inspired you to do what you're doing as well.
No, that's a very good question, Hugh. And like everyone, I imagine I'm shaped by where I started in life. And I came from a community that was bereft of positive role models, with one crucial exception: my father and my mother. And they planted seeds in my mind from a very young age and those seeds I didn't understand at the time. But when I used to see my father being involved in community work, in tackling social injustices through his professional work,
What did your parents do?
My dad was a equality advisor for the city council.
Right.
And in Wolverhampton, yes. And my mother is a housewife, but she's very actively involved in uniting women across different religions and cultures in our neighbourhood. And so I would later realize in my life that those seeds would germinate into consequences that would produce an insatiable desire for, number one, knowledge, and number two, understanding the very social injustices that permeate our society. And ever since then, Hugh, by the grace of God, I've been very deeply involved in tackling social injustices and creating a meaningful change in our communities.
And I suppose even if you're someone that's listening to this that hasn't had those kind of background, positive role models, it's about finding them, isn't it?
Yes.
And trying to find that support, because it does exist and it's out there. You just maybe have to work a little bit harder, doesn't it?
The thing is, it's easier said than done in a certain sense, and this kind of links back to that example I was given about the youth clubs and the underinvestment that we currently have in these public spaces. It's hard for people to be involved in civil society if we don't provide those spaces, if we don't engage in the outreach. And there's only so much we can do within the sector, if that makes sense. Like a lot of the organizations are composed of quite small charities of sometimes like under 10 staff, half of them working part-time. It's hard to cast the net out as wide as you can, because you don't have that backing of, you're not the local council, you're not the national government. So there is also kind of a need from the top down. Like, we talk a lot about the grassroots, and the grassroots is so important to have that organic development and that people voice. But there also needs to be, from the top, a culture where we want to invest and we want to provide these opportunities where people can become more easily involved because they see it in their local spaces.
And if I may just quickly add, interestingly, as I was reflecting on the question you just asked, my initial involvement in social injustices actually began when I started to explore and live through Islamophobia. So as I was growing up, unfortunately, those around me, and including myself, were subject to a barrage of anti-Muslim hatred. Many vitriolic things were said, many diatribes, invectives launched against the Muslim community, and I found this to be intolerable and unbearable. And so in my advanced level study, my A-levels, I actually wrote an EPQ about Islamophobia, and I got full marks on it. And ever since then, I've been speaking...
Can you explain what an EPQ is?
Yes, an EPQ is something you undertake during your A-levels. It's an extracurricular, something that you do extracurricular. And it's a project that one undertakes, could be in the form of a written assessment, could be in the form of arts, films, etc. And I had the privilege of doing a 5,000-word report on Islamophobia and the causes of Islamophobia.
And I think that's an important thing, that people are driven by that personal experience that provides that initial spark.
Yes.
For Qasim, the feeling as a Muslim of seeing a society that is increasingly polarized and has that poisoning of Islamophobia within it. For me, the background of being a migrant myself, coming to the country at 4, seeing the discourse labelled against,
So how old were you when you came out?
Well, I was 4 years old in 2004. So literally, I guess it was that first wave of EU ascension in 2004 of the A8 nations, Poland being one of them. And growing up, for me, it was easy because I spoke with an English accent. So you'd hear sometimes people around you saying things that stigmatize Eastern European communities, but they don't necessarily know that people are listening in. And I've got, a couple of anecdotal stories of that, but it's something that has always angered me in that sense is also from my experience of having a migrant background, but being kind of embedded within the fabric of English society, of using that as a possibility, not only to advocate for countering anti-Eastern European sentiments and stigmatization, but like Qasim said, the importance of solidarity across backgrounds. I wouldn't stop at the line just because you're a white Christian European. It's important to have that solidarity with the Muslim community, with the Hindu community, etc.
And sometimes, Hugh, the solutions are quite evident, and perhaps George Orwell sums it up perfectly in his poem that the hardest thing to see is in front of one's nose. The hardest thing to see is what is in front of one's nose. And when I often reflect about Islamophobia, it's been in public discourse for nearly 25 years, and we're yet to come up with a universally and nationally agreed definition. And I often see Islamophobia as a manifestation of ignorance, because phobia can be described and defined.
I mean, all phobia, fear of the other.
Irrational fear. And so Islamophobia, I do believe, is a manifestation of ignorance. What you know and understand, you don't necessarily fear. But what you don't know and don't understand, then a fear may arise. So if individuals come to see Islam as a religion which disallows racism, injustice, tyranny and oppression, and is a religion of salvation, a religion of redemption, and a religion of acceptance, then I believe people will come to change their view of
I think it's
Islam.
H.P. Lovecraft that once said, the oldest emotion in the world is fear,
Yes.
and the oldest fear is the fear of the unknown. And but the interesting thing about Lovecraft is he himself was quite an interesting individual. So it's ironic that he said that. So are there any books or resources that you would recommend to our viewers today that had an impact on you?
There was that, what we call the Crucible of Multiculturalism, that a text written by B.Q. Parekh.
That's the kind of foundational work.
Escapes my mind. But B.Q. Parekh is one of the most renowned authors, has written a lot of publications on multiculturalism. So I would suggest to those listening, B.Q. Parekh, Tariq Madood are authors.
Stuart Hall, very important authority. Also local Brummie, so we've got a big of our own in that sense as well.
Yeah.
But Stuart Hall has written a vast amount of really informative works on the topic of multiculturalism and how it relates to our current society in terms of the globalized world and the impact of migration, and also very aptly predicted the problems of what we're now seeing in the 2020s of the resurgence of the far right.
Yeah.
And I think just because your explanation about fear and the fear of the unknown, I think a very integral thing, a very integral part to our work is not to combat that fear by resorting to a shouting match. It's about combating fear through conversation and bringing conversation of different people, building across difference to encourage conversation, and that's the way to, heal a divide and heal a fractured society.
It doesn't need to be a leap into the unknown. It can be a step.
Exactly, and chat by chat.
I was going to recommend another individual by the name of Akala. And something
like his book Natives is quite
and something that
incredible.
was at the heart of the conference that we convened, called Diverse Roots, Shared Future, convened in late September. What was at the heart of that conference was that there needs to be a greater cognizance and an acknowledgement of the immense contributions that all minority communities have made to the social fabric of this country. And that begins, Hugh, as I think you said before the beginning of the podcast, with education. So we must confront the reductive narratives that we've been propagated in schools and acknowledge that it's a very Eurocentric and perhaps a white supremacist view of history.
And it's not schools' fault necessarily, it's just the systems that schools have to work within.
Yes.
It's been absolutely fantastic listening to the two of you today. How can people follow you? Where can people go to hear more of your story and join your campaign and join your journey?
I think they can reach. I don't have a very good social media presence, regrettably, but they can reach out to the European Welfare Association
on any social media
page, and via that they can indirectly contact us. We can be contacted if they go through the organization, and we can easily develop a line of communication.
Yeah, I think that's the any social media format whether we're talking about Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, European Welfare Association is on those platforms, and also I guess following us on LinkedIn as well.
Yes.
If anyone wants to chase anything up in that sense personally with Qasim and I.
Yes.
Our work in this is a constantly an evolving process, and sometimes I feel like we add a lot we add a lot of layers on, but we need to get to the core of what we're doing now with the report that we're writing. But we're always happy to cooperate with people. And I mean, like I said, the most important thing in bridging divides is through encouraging conversation. So
yes, and thank you very much, Hugh, for allowing us to be on this platform today, because it's very honourable what the work that you do and the work that this platform does. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Hugh.
Thank you very much. I can't take all the credit. There are lots of people that.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
They're all
Behind
to the Aspire team.
the guys behind the scenes who wanted to be lifted. But
yeah, of course.
thank you both for being here today. Brilliant, absolutely fascinating, and thank you for tuning in. And we'll see you again soon. Take care.